Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Papercast with me, Dominic Hill. In this series I'm going to be talking about the scientific papers that made the greatest impression on me and my work here at the University of Reading as a PhD student. I hope to be able to showcase the work of other students and academics here at the university, as well as one day talk to scientists and science communicators from other institutions as well. In the meantime, I'm going to be focusing primarily on crop science, as that is my nominal area of expertise, and more specifically on the greatest crop of all time. You know it, it's the potato. So now that you know what you're letting yourself in for, let's crack on with episode 1. So for the first episode of the Papercast, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about one of the papers that has probably been the most important to my work so far, specifically with respect to my soilless work. And if you've seen any of the other videos on my channel, you know that soilless crop production is something I'm very interested in, specifically when it comes to, as I said before, the greatest crop of all time, the humble potato. So this paper was published in 1938, which is in scientific terms an extremely long time ago, by W.F. Gericke. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that name right. I couldn't find any pronunciation guides anywhere. If you know a Gericke or are a Gericke and I'm butchering it, and it's making you feel slightly nauseous, please let me know in the comments how to pronounce it so I can sort it out. Gericke just feels the most natural to me. The paper is entitled Crop Production Without Soil. So obviously you can understand why I think it's very important when one of my primary interests as a PhD student is crop production without soil. It was published in the journal Nature, which, as you probably know, is one of the most prestigious academic journals out there. It's the dream of most scientists to be published in Nature. It pretty much makes your career these days. So these days, how old am I? 26. I don't know about any other days. A very brief summary of the paper is that it is the findings of several what Gericke calls commercial experiments supervised by the author that use his soilless crop production system to grow a range of crops, and probably not ones you'd expect either. A brief bio of the author. William Gericke was born in 1882 in Nebraska, USA. He worked at the University of California, where he was probably the first person to investigate the potential for crop production without soil on a commercial scale. So it's for this reason that I consider him to be the father of hydroponics, which is a term he did not coin. A lot of people think he did. Not most people, most people don't know who he is. A lot of people think he came up with the term hydroponics. In this paper, he explicitly states that a colleague of his at the University of California came up with the term hydroponics, but I believe he was the first to publish the term, which he defines as the art and science of crop production or plant growth without soil. So the kind of system he developed was most like a static NFT system. So if you don't know what an NFT system is, it's a hydroponic system, so a system to grow plants that doesn't use soil, where the plant roots are just dangled into a gutter or a trough or some kind of channel with a very thin film, which is what the F stands for, of nutrient solution flowing continuously through the roots. Now that film has to be very thin so that it can be permeated with atmospheric oxygen. So plant roots, as you will know if you've seen any of my other videos, need oxygen just as much as they need water, and the very thin nature of that film allows oxygen to get into the solution and help to oxygenate the roots. You still do normally get a little bit of root death because there's never enough oxygen in an NFT system, but it's just one of the drawbacks of those types of systems. So by 1938, there was already a significant body of research on what was called water culture, which is basically hydroponics, but it was a laboratory technique. I always struggle with that word, and I think that's why almost everyone just says lab. It's a lab technique used to grow plants under highly controlled conditions. So if you wanted to investigate the effects of potassium on daisies, I'm just saying that because there are daisies everywhere here, you could get some daisies, you could put them into a nutrient solution, and then you could vary the concentration of potassium within that nutrient solution. So you could do that in soil. You could add potassium to, the soil, and you could maybe block some potassium somehow. You could leach it out so that you would have a range of concentrations of potassium, but you're never going to get the accuracy that you could achieve in water, because the water should, in theory, all have the same amount of potassium in. Prior to you adding or removing any of it, you could distill it so it has no potassium in it, whereas the soil is going to have varying levels of potassium depending on where you got it from. Even if it's from the same square meter or cubic meter, there's going to be natural variation in the availability of that potassium. Just doing things in soil makes everything more difficult to control. It doesn't mean it has no value, because obviously if you're investigating how plants grow in soil, you need to conduct those experiments in soil. So if you are trying to recommend how to grow plants to farmers who mostly grow plants in soil, you're going to need to investigate how they grow in soil and make your manipulations in soil. But if you're just trying to understand the fundamental biology of plant nutrition, of plant growth, plant development, water culture is a really, really good way of doing that. So Gericke or Gericke or whatever, Gericke was the first person to think we could take this water culture system and we could upscale it to produce crops in the most optimum environment, which is really the goal of hydroponics, is to take the wheat plant or the potato plant or the tomato plant and grow it in the most optimum environment for the genetics of that plant. And as far as I'm aware, Gericke was the first person ever to think that that might be a good idea. So in 1935, before this paper was published, because it takes some of the plants he was growing a long time to grow, so it would have taken a long time to do the experiments and then write it all up, so on, he began to investigate the potential for soilless crop production on a commercial scale. So he states in the paper that beginning in 1935, a number of growers convinced that the method had possibilities established the first production plants. These are under the author's supervision and although organised as commercial ventures, are administered as the author's experiment. So he states that they're commercial ventures. The whole point of this from the beginning was to commercially grow crops in an economically viable way. Obviously there's no point doing it otherwise, because it's unsustainable if you can't make enough money to cover the costs at least. So the method section of this paper is a little bit vague. It doesn't have a distinct method section. It does, however, contain several photos, which for some reason all contain Gericke himself, even when it's not particularly necessary. It does contain several photos that show what he did and a description of his soilless system. So it's not like a modern method section where it's like, this is where it happened, these are the coordinates, this is the environment, this is the concentration of every single nutrient we use. It's just like, we used a couple of pounds of salt which contained some nitrogen and some potassium and whatever, and we threw it into some water and they were roughly this big. And it's more like that. It's almost like a story, a description from a story or a narrative, rather than what we would consider a modern scientific method section. So basically what they did was they got a concrete or wooden basin or trough that was like a foot deep, 30 centimeters deep, half filled that with water, threw some nutrients in the form of salt. Over the top of that basin they put a wire mesh, and on the top of that wire mesh was some kind of substrate. Now normally they use something called Excelsior, which I don't think it's called that anymore, because when you Google Excelsior nothing particularly useful comes up, but from the pictures it looks like some kind of wood wool, like wood chippings, almost like with the texture of like hay or straw, but it looks like it's made out of chippings of wood. Sometimes he says he used vegetable litter, which I think is soil but with one step removed, the actual breakdown process, which I personally consider cheating. I think wool was used as well, basically just something to hold the seed in place over the nutrient solution, because you didn't want to just plant the seed straight into the water. So the results of this experiment are quite impressive. He grew a range of crops, as I said before, but with varying degrees of success. Some crops were not particularly impressive. So for example, he says that wheat is not particularly good in this system, but he grew tobacco, tomatoes, and even bananas pretty well in the system. There's a photo in, I don't know if it's in this, no, it is in this paper, of Gericke standing next to a probably 3 meter tall banana tree that is grown in this system. So on a bed of wood wool or celsior, suspended on a wire mesh over a nutrient solution filled basin. So he actually states, with specific reference to wheat, that the cost of what he calls plant food, which is a term I love and I'm going to be using liberally from now on rather than nutrients, which is very boring, was economically prohibitive to the production of predominantly dry matter crops. That's what he calls them, predominantly dry matter crops. So that's things like wheat, barley, anything that really produces a high concentration of dry matter. Whereas if you think about a tomato or even a banana, there's a lot of water, a lot less dry matter. Now obviously a banana is a tree, and presumably a tree has a lot of dry matter in. I don't know. This is from a long time ago. It's not a particularly thorough paper. It is still extremely interesting. So one of the main reasons why I personally find this paper so fascinating is that potato performed exceptionally well in this system. He says that he produced 1,479 pounds of tubers on an area of a 1/100th of an acre. Now, to almost everyone these days, other than maybe the Americans watching this, that means almost nothing. So I've done the conversion for you, and that works out as about 166 tons per hectare. Now, to put that in a little bit of context, when I was working as a sampler for a potato agronomy company, the average yields that year were, well, it was a really bad year, so it was, like 30 tons a hectare in a good field, I think. The average, from what I've looked at from the data, suggests that 40 tons a hectare is sort of average to pretty good. Some places can get up to 50, mostly in America, but that's really, really intensive farming and requires a huge amount of water. So 40 is roughly average, and this got a yield 4 times higher than that. So and that's obviously comparing yields today in the field compared to a yield achieved by the solar system in the 1930s. So it's pretty impressive, and obviously the understanding of plant nutrition has come along an awful lot since then. We understand the requirements of the plants a lot better, so I have no doubt that this system couldn't be refined to produce even higher yields. So again, there's no real distinct discussion section, but he suggests that hydroponic systems are more likely to be viable with certain types of crop. As we said before, high dry matter concentration crops like wheat and barley don't seem to do particularly well. I guess because a hydroponic system is so heavily focused on water availability more than anything else, that it makes sense to use it with crops that have a high water content. I don't know. I'm sure that one day in the future there will be a hydroponic system that grows wheat and barley and rape and all that sort of stuff really, really well. But at the moment there isn't, and there wasn't for sure back then. He also, interestingly, for a scientist, advises that hydroponic crop production is more of an art than a science, which I guess makes him more of an artist than a scientist. Quite interesting for someone who's published in Nature. I think that's probably just a function of the fact that hydroponics was a very, very, well, hydroponics was, well, it didn't exist before he published this paper. There was no word for it. No one had ever tried to produce crops commercially in a hydroponic system before. So I think what he's alluding to is the fact that they didn't really know a lot about what they were doing at the time. They were just trying things and seeing what worked, which I guess is more of an artistic process. He also obviously implies that further research is required to develop systems which better meet the specific needs of crops, and he makes a distinction to say in specific environments. So he obviously conducted his work around the state of California, but crops perform differently even within the same system in different places around the world. So a hydroponic system that works really well in California, which I am led to believe is very hot and dry, may not perform so well in the UK, where it's cold and miserable most of the time, apart from today. Actually, it's quite nice today, a bit muggy. So he makes that distinction. It's very clear that he thinks that that's important area for future research. So again, doesn't really have a proper conclusion. The paper reads more like a story of what he's done over time, but in my opinion, he is clearly a visionary, and I think he will be remembered as a pioneer of what I would call the fourth agricultural revolution, which I believe will make use of soilless systems to increase yield by maximizing efficiency. So a lot of people have said that the fourth agricultural revolution is going to be based on sustainability and things like organic technologies and permaculture. I don't buy that. I don't see how we can feed an ever-increasing population. I'm happy to be proven wrong on that. I have no particular emotional connection to hydroponics. I just think it's probably the best way forward, because it's the system that I think maximizes efficiency the most. And if you look at the trend of agriculture since it began, it's all to do with increasing efficiency, reducing competition, reducing pests, and hydroponics or aeroponics takes that to the sort of ultimate conclusion, the logical next step. Agriculture is effectively, in my opinion, or as far as I can see it, the removal of competition to grow a specific crop. So that's what a monoculture is. You can grow a higher yield because the wheat plants or the potato plants aren't competing with, trees and grasses and whatever else. That they don't have any competition to take nutrients and water and sunlight and those sorts of things away from the crop. You also remove pests. You remove, the creepy crawlies that like to eat your crop. You try and control the diseases that might affect it. And a hydroponic system is just all of those things on steroids. It's just no competition because you're growing things in a system that is completely designed for that crop. You're growing a crop in a system that is probably removed from nature somehow, so it's not exposed to the environment that can negatively affect yields. There's a fly on my camera. Please don't walk across the lens, because that would be really, really annoying and probably freak a lot of people out. But yes, mini rant about how great I think hydroponics is over. Obviously, the reason it's not used a lot now is because there are still a lot of problems. We don't really have the energy for it, but once we can develop better energy systems, hydroponics becomes infinitely cheaper and then makes sense going forward. So when that does happen, when we do start to use hydroponic systems more and more, we won't be using Gericke's system. It was extremely inefficient, and I don't think it's particularly harsh to say that it wasn't a well-designed system at all. It didn't particularly consider the aeration of roots, which is something we know to be extremely important, not just for the life of the roots, the actual oxygen that those root hair cells need to stay alive, but also for uptake of other nutrients. But his work has definitely inspired the hydro and aeroponic systems that are used today, and the new ones that will continue to be used into the future. So this paper, I think, is the first to demonstrate the advantages of hydroponic systems, and as I just said, it forms the foundation of modern soilless practices. I think it is one of the most important crop science papers of all time, because of the fact he was the first person, or Gericke was the first person, to suggest that we could use a laboratory technique, water culture, to produce more food to feed more people. I think that should be the ultimate goal of every crop scientist. It should be the thing that motivates you. Obviously, your interest in the specific crop or the specific aspect of the specific crop that you study is extremely important. But we have to remember the reason we're given money to do these things is to help to feed people. And you can tell from Gericke's publications and also his book that he really thinks that this is a technology that can be used to increase food security, to feed people, to produce more food with less land using fewer resources, and probably even, I don't think he would have thought about this, but maybe even have less of an effect on the environment. So I love this paper. It's very short. If you would like to read it, I will include a citation and a link to the PDF in the description. It's only a few pages long. It has some really interesting black and white photos, which, as I said, all for some reason have Gericke in them, which you would never see now. You'd never see like a modern paper published in Nature where the scientist is stood in front of his crops like, hey, look how great my crops are. That would be really cool though. Maybe I'll try and get away with it one day. If I ever get published in a top journal. Frontiers is a good journal, I'm already published there. Check that article out as well. It's a lot longer, a lot less interesting probably as well, but I wrote it, so I'll say it's great. But yeah, that's the summary of the paper. Please do go and check it out if you are interested in learning more about hydroponics, the history of hydroponics. He also has a book which I think is called something similar, Crop Production Without Soil, and that does actually go through exactly how to build a system like this. If you have an allotment or a garden and you want to try it out, that book is really helpful. You could try the system, see how it works. It's a very simple, low maintenance system. All you have to do is occasionally fill the basin up and throw some more nutrients in. So it's a fairly robust system, which is a big disadvantage of a lot of more modern hydroponic and aeroponic systems. If you do that, take some videos, take some pictures, share them with me on here or on Reddit. You can find me on Reddit. What's my name on Reddit? It's either Hilldom, at Hilldom on Twitter. That's probably the best place to share them with me actually, because Reddit's notifications aren't particularly good. At Hilldom on Twitter. If you have a go at this, I'd love to see it. Let me know what you think about this style of video in the comments. For the time being, I'm probably just going to be talking about papers I find interesting until I can find some people at the university to talk to me about their work and their publications, which I think will be more interesting and probably work slightly better than me, looking at my laptop and trying to remember what I'd written down to talk about a specific paper. But I'm probably going to do a few more of these, so hopefully you like it. I enjoyed doing it, I enjoyed putting this together. It gave me a reason to go back and look at this paper, and it's going to give me a reason to look at some other papers that I've really enjoyed. But I realise now that I'm rambling on, so all I will say now is thank you very much for listening. If you've made it to the end, well done. I don't know how you put up with me for so long, but thank you for doing so, and I hope to see you in the next video. Should I do a piece? I'm going to do a piece. Peace!